From giant eels to haunted underwater caves, the ocean has a lot of secrets, some of which you don't want to stumble upon. An old World War II ammunition ship off the south coast of England was full of brass-topped shells. Most had been taken by divers over the years, and it was now very rare to see them, apart from a pile in one corner of the ship. The pile of shiny brass metals was miraculously untouched and remarkably clean after spending years underwater, and you only found out why if you swam near them. Out of the murky darkness, the largest eel I have ever seen snakes forward. Without exaggeration, this thing had a head the same size as a horse's head, full of jagged teeth. I could not see the body as it looped into the dark and deeper into the ship. No one got near those shells. Turns out for years this thing had been guarding the shiny brass shells, slithering over them, making them shine. We found out at a bar later that he was famous in the area, and many people went to the wreck just to see him. No idea why this giant creature was guarding them like a dragon and its horde, but some said eels are like magpies and like shiny things. There are multiple scary discoveries in this story in my opinion. First off, a Reddit user just glosses over the fact that they're in a sunken World War II munitions ship. They don't say so, but I would have imagined that people would have died on that ship when it sunk, and there may have even been some remains of the dead still down there. Then to come face to face with a giant eel that is extremely protective over these brass shells would be terrifying. If that was a giant moray eel, then those creatures can grow up to 2.5 meters in length and can be very deadly in the water. Had that creature interpreted what our diver was doing as threatening, then they may not have made it to shore later that day to be able to share the story. Number 4 on this list is a freezer. This story from a Reddit user is just all kinds of creepy. Count_Dynamo writes, I've done a number of dives, and the strangest thing I ever saw was a large deep freezer with a heavy industrial chain wrapped around multiple times with about 5 cinder blocks attached. It was very rusted, and the deep freezer itself had to have been 30 years old, probably more. This was about 90 feet just off of Vancouver Island, Canada. The situation gave myself and the other divers the heebie-jeebies. Logged the GPS and depth coordinates and notified the police. We were able to find out what was inside since one of the divers had friends with the local police. 10 porcelain dolls. Now for starters, I'm actually kind of happy that they found porcelain dolls inside that freezer, because when I was initially reading that story and heard about a freezer that was locked up and weighed down, I initially thought of a dead body, but having 10 porcelain dolls raises a lot of questions. Were these dolls potentially cursed and that was the only way to get rid of them? If you've ever come in contact with a cursed doll, then locking it up is the first thing to do. Ed and Lorraine prove it with their handling of the Annabelle doll. If these dolls are cursed though, then this discovery gets even more scary. Clearly, whoever locked them in that freezer threw them to the bottom of the ocean and didn't want them to be found. Bringing them back up to the surface probably wasn't the best idea. Number 3 on this list is a color change. Now, a color change doesn't really sound that scary at all, but in this particular case, it's definitely pretty creepy. A diver writes, I was diving off the coast of Fiji and we went through a natural tunnel, like a 10-meter cave/passage through a rock formation. So we start swimming through the cave and suddenly the light was weird, like the blue tint from the water has been replaced by a red one. Now all divers will know that this isn't only weird because the color changed, but also because red is the first color to disappear after a certain depth, usually between 30 to 40 feet, and we were well over 70 feet. Also bear in mind this was late morning on a sunny day. So imagine this scene. Me and my dive buddy are going through an underwater cave and suddenly everything, for no apparent reason, is tinted red, a color that you were literally supposed to be unable to see while diving at that depth during the day. Upon exiting the cave, everything was back to blue. I thought it was just me, so I didn't signal to go back up. After the dive, my buddy asked me if I'd seen the water tint red as well. We can't explain it, and the folks from the local dive shop had no idea what we were talking about. Now that story is super weird. We've got to keep in mind that these guys were 70 feet below the surface at that point. If I was 70 feet below the surface and everything changed colors to a deep red, I would be very scared for my life. Obviously we don't know for sure, but it sounds like that cave that they stumbled upon is haunted by something. It's either haunted by something or that particular cave can produce some strange light phenomenon. Either way, it would have been very frightening, and I'm glad that the two divers in this story made it out okay. Number 2 on this list is a school of sharks. The next discovery comes in from a professional diver in the Bahamas who was diving down to recover a dead body. What's crazy about this story is that the dead body isn't the scary part. His online name is Keith Ba, and he writes, "After an hour or two of searching, I went back into the blue hole to see if there were any signs of him. Saw the glint of his watch and his arm sticking out near the bottom. Started descending down to the bottom to recover the body. On the way down, realized that the bottom was a school of sharks that must have been there for breeding. So many sharks that they blocked the view of the actual bottom. Descended into darkness, grabbed his arm, couldn't stand to look at the body, and started ascending. The sharks followed and were circling around the both of us. Had to take a break at halfway at around 60 feet as to not get the bends. Extremely scared. The entire time waiting to normalize being super scared. Victim was struck by a passing boat." So not only is finding a dead body underwater super scary in my opinion, but to stumble upon so many sharks that you can't even see the bottom of the ocean, that's beyond terrifying. Then to have said sharks follow you up to the surface, deciding whether or not they're going to eat you, would have been absolutely brutal. He didn't specify what type of sharks they were, but after doing some research, sharks tend to get far more aggressive during mating, and therefore the risk of our divers getting attacked is significantly increased. Also, the number of sharks that can gather during mating season can rise into the hundreds. One shark is scary enough and will likely win in a fight, but tens to even hundreds of them would have easily had their way with this diver. Not sure about you guys, but if that was me, I would be exclusively a land dweller from then on out. Number 1 on this list is a person. People aren't typically scary discoveries, but in this case by some deep sea divers, it definitely was. One diver writes, "Me and 2 buddies were on a night dive in the Puget Sound hunting prawns. It was about 1 AM and we're a good 100 feet deep, the darkest black you could imagine. We used to do this thing on night dives where we'd get in a circle, turn off our lights, then stir up the water and watch the bioluminescence float around us like floating stars in a black watery space. Only this time, we turn off our lights, stir up the water, and the water glows just enough to reveal a 4th person sitting in our circle. We were at a dive resort, so it wasn't so odd to see another diver, only it was 1 AM and we'd see nobody else prepping a dive at the dock. He was also alone, which was odd considering the dangerous conditions of a night dive in those waters, and he had no fins or gloves. I don't know how he swam so well without fins or didn't get hypothermia without boots or gloves. We wore dry suits because it was so cold, but this dude was in a wetsuit with exposed skin. We thought we saw a giant gash on one of his legs. So the 3 of us all notice him and we're too scared to move. I can hear my buddies panting in their regs and the guy just smiles, waves, and then swims away. Whenever you think you're alone and someone just shows up like in an alley at night, it's weird. 100 feet underwater at night is terrifying. After reading this story, I got some serious ghost vibes. Now obviously I can't know for sure and those divers didn't either, but this man just appeared out of nowhere and had a giant gash on his leg. He also wasn't wearing the proper gear and they didn't see him enter the water when they were getting ready to go. Potentially, rather than just be another diver out and about, this is the ghost of someone who went diving and died. Now their spirit just swims through the ocean for eternity. I've read a lot of ghost stories and reports of sightings before, and that has all the telltale signs of one.
Kicking off at number 5, The Pit of Arms, which is a pretty intriguing title, isn't it? If not probably the best opening track to a death metal album. But as it turns out, this particular Pit of Arms is much more terrifying than the likes of Cradle of Filth or Job for a Cowboy, because it's exactly what it says on the tin, or the pit to be specific. Throughout the archaeological dig sites of ancient Europe, researchers have found numerous circular pits constructed in the same strange fashion, dotted across the continent, that all seem to date back to around, roughly speaking, 4000 BC. Most of them have left researchers pretty perplexed, but this one in particular, a pit found near the village of Bergheim in France that was filled to the brim with 6 adult arms, 1 child's arm, and random scattered hand bones. Also, the team of researchers on this mystery obviously had a sense of humour as they named their research paper A Farewell to arms. So what were they doing there? Well, strangely enough, above the layer of arms and hand bones were the skeletons of the limbless victims, which seems to suggest these Neolithic victims were tortured and dismembered before they were later buried on top. It's left researchers pretty perplexed, to say the least, but it seems to indicate evidence of organised warfare in the Neolithic period of ancient Europe, although no other evidence of conflict has been found to support this theory. And people have been digging in Europe for a long time. They could have been captured enemy warriors, or they could have been innocent victims of a massacre. The only thing we can know for certain is their arms were thrown in a pit, and then they shortly followed. That's grim. Coming in at number 4, Hearts of Lead. And yeah, pretty death metal too, right? I could release an album at this rate. In actual fact though, this entry on our list is possibly the most modern that we've ever covered, and yet it still dates back to over 400 years ago. Now, have you ever loved someone so much that you want to be buried with their heart in a lead urn for 400 years? And also, I'm quite concerned as to whether these hearts were given posthumously. I really hope they were. Well, as it seems, archaeologists from France's National Institute were extensively excavating graves for years at an ancient cemetery in northwestern France at the convent of the Jacobins in Rouen, in one of the oldest preserved cemeteries in Europe. There, underneath the basement of the convent, they unearthed hundreds of burials, some of which dated back to the late 16th century, and 5 of which, strangely enough, were buried with the same familiar set of artifacts, a heart-shaped urn made of lead. Oh, that's cute, right? Well, after taking a closer look at these warm fuzzy relics, it was discovered that they each had a human heart sealed within them. After more digging, it became apparent that it was all the rage for wealthy upper class families to be buried with the literal hearts of their spouses and loved ones, and they were also so well preserved that scientists could scan the organs through MRI imaging to figure out what they died from. Nothing says I love you quite like, here's my heart in an urn, right? Coming in next at number 3, the Altamura Man. Now, dying alone is a terrifying enough notion, but how about dying alone at the bottom of a 26-foot deep well in the far recesses of a further 200-foot long tunnel system, only to be encrusted into a wall of pure limestone for over 150,000 years? Well, whilst you'd be perfectly preserved and your skeleton frozen in time for modern scientists to find you, that's also exactly what happened to one of our unfortunate Neanderthal ancestors, the Altamura Man. And his skeleton was so well preserved that researchers could even recreate perfectly how he would have looked way back when. And he looked like this. What a great looking fella. Hasn't he got the kindest eyes you've ever seen? Well, unfortunately, way back in 1993, when he was discovered by spelunkers in a karstic cave near the Italian town of Altamura, he was a little bit less kindly looking and instead resembled something straight out of a nightmare, petrified by stalagmites and sunken into the cave wall itself through thousands upon thousands of years of limestone droplets. I'm not sure what's more terrifying, the ultimate fate of the Altamura Man or the fact that he was discovered when he was lost to the mysteries of the earth for over 150,000 years by a bunch of spelunkers. Next up at number 2, Capacocha. Very little is known about the ancient ritualistic practice of Capacocha, and the earliest known written accounts were from the Spanish conquistadors in their observations of ancient Inca practices, documenting numerous accounts of child sacrifices where children would be led to caves high up in the mountainous peaks of the Andes region to give their lives and be reborn as gods and goddesses in their culture. It sounds like incredibly heavy stuff, and it is, but the practice of Capacocha was incredibly important to the Inca civilization, and it was considered to be the highest honor for members of their society. And although that's terrifying enough in itself, the method in which they were sacrificed is even more terrifying. Essentially, they were paraded around the kingdom with huge feasts held in their honor, where the procession led by the emperor would make its way toward the frozen peaks of the mountain over month-long ritualistic celebrations. There, the sacrifice was taken to a tomb and offered up to the gods, where the tomb was sealed over days with mounds and mounds of dirt. So then, when a group of archaeologists were surveying the region in 1999 at a site found near a volcano in Argentina, they unwittingly unearthed one of these tombs of legend, only to find a scene literally frozen in time. 3 ancient Inca children perfectly preserved in ceremonious fashion down to the ice-cold climate of the region. Whew, yeah, exactly. That's ancient history for you guys. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, Sacred Ridge. Now, if you know anything about Sacred Ridge, an ancient site in Durango, Colorado, you'll know that it's synonymous with one of the most grisly and violent atrocities in ancient American history. What was once thought to be evidence of a peaceful habitat of the early Pueblo culture, after closer excavation, it was revealed that Sacred Ridge played witness to a bloody and brutal massacre, given the fact that 2 of the excavated pit houses contain nearly 15,000 human body fragments belonging to around 35 separate people, thought to be about half of the village's population. After analysis of the bone fragments, evidence of extreme torture and mutilation quickly became apparent, and it is thought that the massacre was part of a wider uprising in the Ridge's Basin area sometime around the year 810. Now, the reason for this massacre will never be truly known, but the grisly reality of this discovery can only lead historians to study the archaeological evidence, which all points toward methods of extreme torture. After studying the bone fragments of the 33 victims' feet, researchers concluded that these methods of torture all bore the hallmarks of hobbling. Yes, hobbling, as in the excruciating action carried out by Annie Wilkes in Stephen King's Misery. It was thought that hobbling was used as a violent warning sign to other victims, but the fact that pretty much all of the bone fragments contain the same trauma marks only leads to more questions. Now, there are a multitude of theories surrounding the fate of the victims of Sacred Ridge, but it seems that the answer, whatever it may be, will be forever lost to the mysteries of time. Kicking off at number 5, the Faron Delta Necropolis. Now, Greece, of course, is the land of one of this planet's longest standing ancient civilizations, and dig sites are a dime a dozen across both the rural and metropolitan areas of the country, slowly uncovering the mysteries of a long lost Greek society. While in early 2016, researchers discovered one terrifyingly unique manner of burial and mass execution. Apparently because, well, they're not entirely sure. Found in a large ancient cemetery in part of the Faron Delta Necropolis in Athens were at least 80 skeletons in a line stacked on top of each other with their wrists clamped together in a chain of iron shackles. The strangest thing was, though, that all of these men were incredibly young and in a very good state of health, indicating that they weren't slaves or common criminals, and the orderly, uniform way that they were buried seemed to support this. Whatever happened was an incredibly violent act, with their hands bound above their heads before being uniformly executed. The whole thing doesn't really make any sense at all, but the leading theory is that all of these young men were part of an attempted coup during a period of great unrest for Athenian society. The coup failed, of course, but the fact that these men were all buried in a respectful manner despite the violent circumstances that they were executed in leaves far more perplexing questions than it does answers. Swinging in at number 4, the Persian Siege. Now, in the ancient world, sieges and bloody battles were the only real way to get things done, but during an age where the most cutting-edge technology was a composite ballista, it was pretty shocking when archaeologists discovered some startling evidence of chemical warfare. In 256 AD, well, turns out that over 2,000 years ago, 19 Roman soldiers rushed into a cramped underground tunnel as they prepared to defend the Roman-held Syrian city of Dwara from an army of Persian soldiers digging beneath the city's mud brick walls. Instead of meeting a horde of Persian besiegers, though, they were met by one soldier, and then a wall of noxious black smoke turned their lungs into acid. They all died in excruciating pain, sealed for eternity beneath the earth. But flash forward to the 1920s, though, and French archaeologist Robert Dumensil began excavating the Roman site that backed up against the Euphrates River. That's when he found the piled up skeletal remains of the 19 Roman soldiers and one lone Persian at the other end of the tunnel. Initially, he thought that the Persian soldier had somehow managed to defeat 19 highly trained legionnaires in close quarters combat, but that's when he noticed crystals of sulfur and bitumen scattered across the tunnel walls. Turned out the Persian force had developed an experimental tar-like petrochemical that burnt fast and hot and killed with deadly efficiency. Also turns out that chemical warfare was much more common than we expected in the ancient world. What a way to go, eh? Next up at number 3, the mystery of Herxheim. And this one is pretty damn terrifying, really. Sometime in 5300 BC, which is a long time ago, what is known as a linear pottery culture developed in the southwest region of Herxheim in Germany, one that for all intents and purposes could be described as an idyllic, peaceful Stone Age settlement. Safe from invaders and predators, the village thrived with its rudimentary agriculture and societal development. That is until sometime around 4950 BC, when the settlement in Herxheim abruptly and without warning disappeared. But They didn't exactly disappear, instead they were ritualistically butchered, smashed to pieces, and buried beneath the same dirt that they once called home. Turns out in 2009 an archaeological dig site unearthed human remains of over 1,000 ancient villagers. The bones were of men, women, children, even infants and fetuses. Stranger still though, tool markings on all of the bones showed that the flesh had been carefully scraped off, while larger bones had been broken, possibly to get at the marrow inside. Hell, even the skulls were cracked open in an effort to extract their brains. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing and were incredibly proficient at butchering the human anatomy, presumably to eat, as there was no sign of the removed flesh in the surrounding area. It gets weirder though, because after extracting DNA from their remains, it turned out that these people came from all over Europe in roughly a 500-mile radius. In fact, the leading theory is that all of these people volunteered to come to Herxheim on their own free will to be ritualistically sacrificed and then seemingly eaten. Yeah. Coming in at number 2, the Tomb of the Sunken Skulls. Talking of ritualistic burial sites, there's an even older one, and it's even weirder actually. Sometime in 2009, archaeologists found what they believe to be a Stone Age settlement near what was once a shallow lake in Motala, a town in southwest Sweden. The routine dig took a strange turn though when researchers discovered the skulls and skull fragments from 11 individuals, including men, women, children and infants. In fact, the site, which would later be known as Canal Jordan, turned out to be nearly 8,000 years old. But we also have to remember that Canal Jordan was a lake, and the remains were found stacked inside a large stone mass grave with a giant heavy lid built on the bottom of a body of water. Hey, it gets weirder though guys, because 2 of the human skulls found were pierced with wooden stakes, with the majority of the others showing signs of also being penetrated by sharp objects. It seemed to point toward using their heads as some sort of bizarre trophy or totem, but also it poses the question, why would you then bury them underneath a lake in a stone tomb with children? But hey, again, it gets even weirder, because one of the female skulls found there was actually filled with fragments of bone from all of the other skulls in the tomb, like some weird kind of horrifying potpourri. The leading theory is that Canal Jordan likely served as a sacred meeting spot for several nomadic bands of Mesolithic Swedes roaming the forest and shores of Sweden over 8,000 years ago. For some reason though, they felt compelled to bury people's heads in a stone tomb at the bottom of a lake, and no one really knows why. My best guess though, vampires. Or aliens. Alien vampires. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, the Claddagh mummies. If you know anything about bog bodies, you'll know that they're already terrifying enough. The British Isles are relatively unique in the sense that they're littered with geographical peat bogs, a unique high acid, low oxygen environment which inhibits specific bacteria that break down organics. Because of that, they're also perfect for preserving bodies, and history has shown numerous instances of discovering ancient bodies hidden away in the deep peat bogs of Scotland, Ireland, England and Wales. Well, usually they're just incredibly well preserved, mummified perfectly for archaeological purposes, but back in early 2012, scientists discovered 2 3,000-year-old Scottish bog bodies, remnants of the 11th century ancestral houses of Claddagh, a prehistoric village on the Isle of South Uist. But hold on, because if that timeline isn't already peculiar enough, it gets weirder. Because first and foremost, researchers discovered that these 2 corpses had been buried between 300 and 600 years after their death. Hold on though, because it does get weirder, because these corpses quickly had scientists scratching their heads because their bones just didn't match up, although they showed clear signs of being articulated as one whole cadaver. Turned out after DNA testing each of their limbs, they were from completely separate people, all of which had died at different points in ancient history. It's what's called a composite mummy, and no one has any idea what the hell it was or still is, but for some reason an ancient society was collecting body parts and sticking them all together in some horrifying Frankensteinian manner. Yeah, let that one sink in. Kicking off at number 5, the Massacre of Nurak. And whilst this may not be the most surprising entry on the surface, after all, battlefields and sites of mass brutal warfare are often the first place that archaeologists look when trying to dig up the many ghosts of the past. No, because it's in the sense and scale of the Battle of Nurak that makes this one incredibly interesting from a modern perspective. In 2012, just off the southwest edges of Lake Turkana in Kenya, a mass pile of bones were uncovered at a site known as Nurak. To begin with, researchers first discovered several bones in a site that had once been a lagoon that were in the process of gradually being revealed by the sands of time. But as they dug deeper, the crew found a total of 27 skeletons, some that were nearly complete and some that were merely a few fragments of bone, but all of them had one thing in common. They dated back between 9,000 and 10,500 years ago. But it was in the haphazard arrangement of these skeletons that really made the researchers take note, because Nurak was by no means a burial site, but instead evidence of a brutal massacre. A massacre that occurred with at least 30 people in a time where anthropology believes that humanity only roamed in small groups of hunter-gatherers. Pretty much all of the bodies harboured blunt force trauma head wounds, as well as evidence of arrow wounds to the head and neck. They were men, women and children, and one of them was found with her knees broken, lying on her side with her wrists in front as if they were bound. Although the Massacre of Nurak still only offers more questions than answers, one thing is for certain: war has been a bloody page in our history books for a lot longer than we first thought. Swinging in at number 4, Aragundi's mummified lung, which, if you can't tell already with part 1 and part 2, pretty much all of these entries would make up a noteworthy death metal album in their own right, and Aragundi's mummified lung is no exception, mainly because I just love saying Aragundi's mummified lung. Anyway, if you know anything about ancient European history, you will know that the Merovingian dynasty of legend that ruled throughout Central Europe up until the 8th century, predominantly as kings and queens of France and Germany, were pretty interesting folk to say the least. The vast majority of their remains are buried in intricate stone sarcophagi in the Basilica of Saint Denis in Paris, but in 1959, when an archaeologist was digging through the site, he discovered a pretty strange skeleton that wasn't like the rest. Because this one, as you may have guessed, had a single mummified lung, alongside the rest of her skeleton, a single strand of hair, bits of jewellery and several fragments of textiles and leather. This was Aragundi's Regine, a Merovingian queen that lived between 515 and 580 as one of the 6 wives of King Coltaire I. But why did she have a single mummified lung? No one else did, and it wasn't exactly common practice throughout ancient European culture, right? Well, as it turns out, yes, it was, although the Merovingians were just really bad at it. In a few isolated cases, their people would attempt to embalm particularly elite individuals following the mummification procedure that they'd learned from the Romans, which in turn the Romans had adopted from the Egyptians. It's like telephone but with mummification. Their idea was to inject a strange tincture into the throat of the corpse and kind of just hope that it mummified the rest of the body. In this case, nope, it was just a single lung. Nice try though. Next up at number 3, Pit of the Bones. And we've had many pits as so far in our top 5 scary archaeological list, most notably the Pit of Arms that you guys aptly decided to call the Armpit, but this one is a little bit more terrifying than the rest. And what if I told you it contained evidence of death and burial that was at least 500,000 years old? Yeah. Hold on a minute. In Spain, in the Atapuerca mountain range, lie a series of caves that wind deep within the rock, and at the end of one of those winding corridors is a pit that plunges 43 feet into the deep darkness. At the bottom of that pit are thousands upon thousands of tiny bone fragments that researchers have found to make up at least 28 individuals of the species Homo heidelbergensis, as well as a completely other unknown species of humanoid, perhaps believed to be of Denisovan origin. Now, don't get me wrong, this particular entry is more intriguing than anything else, but a pit of complete and utter darkness that has over 30 skeletal corpses at the bottom of it, yeah, whilst being something straight out of a horror movie, it's also, you know, sounds like something that would have been planned, right, by say a community of people. But wait, their bodies are over 400,000 years old. Why would anyone be throwing 30 plus bodies down a pit over 400,000 years ago? I mean, being terrifying aside, the Pit of the Bones is awesome, and we're yet to learn so much more from it. Hopefully. Anyway, swinging in at number 2, Cannibal Neanderthals. Again, another band name. Am I right? But if we're talking about caves, we also need to talk about one of the most horrifyingly stark reminders of the desperate dangers that the denizens of our fair planet Earth can be forced to take. It is thought that between 120 and 130,000 years ago, our Neanderthal cousins died out after not being able to adapt to the incredible climate change transitioning across our planet. It is thought to have taken several generations, but in that brief period of time, it seems that Neanderthals were forced to go to incredibly extreme lengths to survive. There are over 220 European sites alone that show similar evidence, but one in particular has perhaps the bleakest encounter. In the cave of Bois-Moulagursi in southeastern France, archaeologists discovered 120 bones from over 6 individuals that would otherwise have gone unnoticed as they were mixed together with a grouping of animal bones. The Neanderthal remains showed a brutal resemblance though, as each of the bones were shown to have desperate cut marks across their entire skeleton, literally from head to toe. Not only that, but they also shown clear signs of crushing and chewing in a manner that was consistent with a single episode of cannibalism. Neanderthals usually buried their dead, but not in this case. Researchers believe that this was the final desperate act of a dying species forced to resort to eating their own people in an attempt to survive. It by no means makes them monsters, but instead people who had no other option if they wanted to keep on living, a species that had failed to adapt to a changing planet. There's a warning somewhere in that one, right? And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, the Heslington Brain, which makes up 5 for 5 in our death metal album listing because come on, this stuff is just writing itself at the minute. How old do you reckon the oldest preserved human brain is? A couple of hundred years? 500 years? Well, no. The oldest preserved human brain is in fact 3,000 years old. In 2008, buried in a pit near the village of Heslington in Yorkshire, England, an archaeological dig commissioned by the University of York discovered a dismembered human skull buried beneath the earth. Which, you know, any kind of head without a body is already terrifying enough, but of course, in this case, it gets worse. Around the skull were a series of possibly ritualistic objects, but of course there was no body, which instantly begged the question, who the hell was burying heads with ritualistic objects over 3,000 years ago? Well, of course, it gets even more worse because as researchers were making laboratory observations on the skull, they noticed that there was something inside of it, and that was the Heslington Brain, the oldest organic ancient brain tissue in recorded knowledge, which had been perfectly preserved in the strange manner that it had been buried. You see, according to researchers, it's thought that the subterranean surroundings of the head did wonders for its preservation, given the fact that it had been separated from the poor victim's body and buried nearly immediately after death. However, as of 2019, the precise mechanism by which the Heslington Brain was preserved is a complete and utter mystery. All we have is a 3,000-year-old brain that we have no idea what to do with. If you're asking me, although I usually like to keep a factual head on this shoulders, I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to say that this one is probably the likeliest case for vampires.
Number 5 on this list is a mistake. So I know that's kind of weird. How do you discover a mistake? Well, in a story from One Dumb Diver, and yeah, that is their actual handle, they do just that. They write, when I was 15, I took the family boat out and dove the reef myself to clear my head. That was mistake number 1. I was down at a depth of about 90 feet when I was only rated for 60. While diving, I spotted a 3.5 meter mako shark coming right at me. For those who are unaware, makos are basically the cheetahs of the ocean and they only have 2 speeds. Curious, which is harmless, and lunch. This guy was in lunch mode, so I hovered, as I'd been trained to do since there was no way for me to escape it. Nowadays, we dive with shark shields, which emit electronic pulses that freak the sharks out and keep them away, but back then, what we used was essentially a chainmail sleeve, the idea being that sharks hate the taste of metal, so if you give it your arm, it'll bite down, decide you're gross, and move along. So I wait, and it comes, and I make a perfect move to give it my arm. However, just before the crunch, it occurred to me that I'd left my sleeve on my bed. I had my knife drawn, however now I had a series of problems. I had a huge open gashing wound on my arm from the bite in open water and trailed blood everywhere. Once the shock wore off, you realize that you're in salt water, and salt water and open wounds, they don't feel too good. In a panic, I dropped my weight belt and shot up to the surface without any sort of waiting period. Because I hadn't been paying attention to the currents, I was approximately a quarter mile downstream of my boat, which means I had to swim up to it. So I end up racing back to shore with nothing more than a tourniquet to staunch the bleeding. Long story short, my series of unfortunate self-inflicted events earned me 172 stitches, boatloads of physical therapy because the shark had actually bitten down into my tricep and detached it, and easily identifiable scars on one of my arms for the rest of my life. So that story right there, folks, is why I personally don't think I'm ever going deep sea diving. I love sharks, they're super cool, I love to learn about sharks, but I am more than happy to keep them in a tank at the aquarium and learn about them in that way. Swimming with them or discovering one in front of you on the day that you also forgot your protective gear, not something that sounds like a great time. Number 4 on this list is a barracuda. El Herrera 9519 writes, "One time when my parents visited Mexico, they went diving and my mom was slightly lower down than my dad, looking at the ocean floor. My mom had on a gold necklace that was floating in the water around her. It was a sunny day and a fairly shallow dive, so it was sparkling. My mom looked below at all the critters when my dad grabbed her and started frantically shaking her arm to get her attention. She looked up and a barracuda was directly in front of her, staring intently at the shiny necklace. She slowly moved up her hand to cover the necklace and then slowly and calmly moved away from it, and it took off without bothering them anymore, but still pretty unsettling, and taught my mom to be a little bit more aware of her surroundings when diving." So I looked it up, and barracudas can grow to be 1.8 meters in length. Pair that with their extremely sharp teeth and the fact that shiny objects remind them of the little silverfish that they eat, and you have yourself in a pretty bad situation. The woman in this story is honestly extremely lucky that this fish waited to decide if it was going to attack or not. Most times she wouldn't have had time to respond and it would have just gone to take a bite. Considering this necklace would have been around her neck, having a barracuda bite into it could have ended very badly. Number 3 on this list is a kelp forest. Duct Tape Jedi writes, "After a day of boat diving in Monterey Bay on the California coast, we had a night dive planned. I was there with 2 friends celebrating my birthday, and we were part of a larger group of divers. My friends were too tired for the night dive, and I was too, but I got invited to buddy with another diver whose friends also decided to stay on the boat. So I was following my new buddy through the kelp when some of it caught on my tank. I tried to pull clear but managed to get tangled even more to the point where I was unable to move. I kept shining my light around looking for my buddy, but he was nowhere to be seen. After what seemed like an hour but was possibly just a few minutes, I felt some of the kelp loosen up and then saw that my buddy was cutting it off with a knife. I was so exhausted after struggling that when we got to the surface, he had to tow me back to the boat." So discovering a full-on kelp forest, I mean, that would honestly be really cool, I think. Obviously, what happened to our diver would have been incredibly scary though. Having to wrestle for over an hour or however long he was there for with some kelp in the dark, probably thinking that you're going to drown, doesn't sound great. But if you did discover a kelp forest and that didn't happen, then I think it'd be pretty sweet. If you're going to go though, then make sure you carry your own knife, because you wouldn't want to end up like our friend here. Number 2 on this list is a body. This story is from Texas Guy 911, and he says, "I was diving in a local pond with a group of much more advanced cave divers than I was. I'm leading the dive as to get used to the pressures and responsibilities of heading the procession, and they're mentoring me. The known horrible visibility makes it impossible to navigate by compass, so we follow a line put by other divers. These lines go from one sunken item to another. So I know I'm about to hit a small sunken boat, but I don't remember which one. There are a few similar in a row in the same state of decay. I'm the first in the group, and I get to the boat, and I see someone's black army boots sticking out from the inner quarters. It looks somewhat new, not like items you find on the bottom. It's hard to see due to so much muck in the water. So I touch the boot, thinking it's by itself, but it won't lift, like it's attached to something heavy. I put my hand further in and feel the leg continuing out, pants, the calf, and now I see the second leg. I turn around and show a sign for the emergency ascend to the group behind me. Everyone has a sour face. Nobody wants to go to the surface, but it's a rule that if one says up, others in the group must abort, no questions. They wanted me to explain with signs why, but what's a diver's sign for a corpse? I feel like I rush toward the surface, even though I'm trying to stay calm and take time. So we're on the lake's surface. I have this adrenaline rush, can't breathe enough. So I tell them there's a body down there. I see rolling eyes from everyone once they see I'm serious. I describe in detail what I saw, and then we go down again. Once we locate it, we don't know if we should go forward or backward, as there are several boats on the line, and who knows in which boat the body is in and how far we drifted while taking it out on the surface. Well, we find all the boats before seeing the original one, of course. So our customary leader goes into the boat's cabin and we wait. I'd say he was rather courageous at this point. Then he emerges from the cloud of muck and tells us all to surface. So gluing information together from what we learned later on, it actually turns out the police or some other agency had body recovery training in the same lake the same day. When they went for lunch, they stuffed their fully dressed, anatomically correct rubber doll in one of the sunken boats for a few hours for safekeeping. So that didn't turn out to be an actual body, but I still think this would have been super scary. To feel a leg and then another leg in the darkness of the water like that on one of your first dives, I mean, that would be a lot. Maybe I'm just weak because deep sea diving is just not for me, but honestly, that would have scarred me for potentially life, whether the body is real or not. Number 1 on this list is a survivor. Off the coast of Nigeria roughly 8 years ago, a tugboat broke down and sank to the bottom of the ocean. 3 whole days later, a diving crew went out to the wreckage to see what was down there and recover the dead bodies. It was thought that no one could have possibly survived the crash and that all 12 people on the boat were dead. That's why the crew was so shocked when they found someone had actually survived. Maybe this doesn't seem as scary as finding someone who had died, but we're lucky enough to have the actual clip of them recovering this person and just watch as the hand comes out.
Alright, you found one, yeah? He's alive, he's alive.
The startled dive team discovered the tugboat's cook had survived for 3 days.
So that one image of having a hand reach out of the dark and stormy nothing would have actually terrified me. Not to mention that man who survived down there. That would have been 3 days by himself surviving in this tiny air pocket, most likely believing that the world has left you for dead. This is definitely one of those scary discoveries that's for the better, because someone's life was saved, but as the Reddit user Edgar writes, I can't imagine how creepy and unexpected it would be to be on a mission to recover the dead and have a hand reach out to you like it did.
Number 5. Spiral graves. Okay, remember in Game of Thrones when all those body parts were left in like a crazy weird spiral formation? The Night King or the whatever king was doing it? I don't know. Imagine if you were walking and all of a sudden you see that. I would probably throw up on the spot. Well, that's pretty close to what was found beneath Mexico City in 2006. Archaeologists discovered a 2,400-year-old burial site containing 10 bodies, placed in a very peculiar way. The bodies were found roughly 4 feet beneath a building at the Pontifical University of Mexico. And here's the weird part. The bodies were found in a spiral formation around a centric point, as if they were kind of moving around something. Which is even weirder, the arm bones were interlocked, so it's like, were they placed there on purpose? What's going on here? To quote Jimena Rivera, director of the Project of Excavation and Archaeological Salvage, nailed that one I think, there was one individual over the other. So for example, the head of one individual was like in the chest of another, and the hand of one dude was like under the back of another guy. What a weird party. And the craziest part, the body of a baby was found on top of another body. This whole thing is just disgusting. What kind of ritual was this? There's been no previous record of a burial done that way, so why now? It's still unclear why this burial site even exists or why the bodies were placed in such odd ways. Who knows, maybe it was a surprise birthday party and the guy didn't show up, so they just stayed there for 2,000 years. That, my friend, is commitment. Number 4, the London Hammer. Found in 1936 in London, Texas, not London, England, or London, Ontario. We don't talk about that third one. A man named Max Hahn and his wife spotted a strange rock that seemed to have a wooden handle sticking out of it. Now, of course, they were curious, so they went over and took a closer look. They realized that the wooden handle was moving a bit, but the rock was wrapped around it. Odd. So once the rock was then cracked open, it was revealed that there was a hammer inside of the rock. Thor, is this yours? The rock itself dates to be back from the Ordovician period, which was about 400 million years ago, give or take. Which is pretty wild considering that human beings have only really been around for about 200,000 years. So what's the deal? Is this hammer from the future, Asgard? We need answers now. The hammer itself is in amazing condition for being as old as it is. Strangely enough, parts of the handle have actually turned into coal, yet the 96% iron hammerhead has yet to rust. I've gone through like 3 bikes in my adult life. The rust got 2 of them real good, real good. This hammer must have been covered in CLR. Or a mystery is afoot, I don't know. The hammer is 6 inches long and 1 inch thick, and it doesn't look like it was made by accident. The hammer is actually very similar to late 1800 man-made tools, so the discovery has us stumped. How can something be made that long ago by humans? Many believe this is the first piece of evidence that time travel exists. Also, how is it still intact? I feel like the wood should have broke off ages ago. If you want a glimpse of the mystery hammer yourself, you can find it on display right now in the Creation Evidence Museum in Glen Rose, Texas. And then you can decide for yourself. Number 3, Antira Mechanism. After being submerged for over 2,000 years, we believe we found the oldest known analog computer to date. Discovered in 1902 by Greek politician Spyridon Stays, this clock-sized device was said to be made sometime between 70 and 200 BCE. That's an old clock. More like a great-grandfather clock, am I right? So does this thing track your steps? Can it change songs? No and no. It was actually meant for much more. This extremely complex piece of history was meant to calculate the positions of astronomical objects, containing over 30 spinning gears and wheels, and colored rocks even, to mark which planet was which. The Antira Mechanism also tracked the moon, the sun, all the eclipses, and most importantly, what day the Olympics are. Talk about a cool reminder. I think it was yesterday. Sorry, I know, it was, I messed up, I f***ed up, sorry guys. We're not quite sure how humans figured this out that long ago, but each additional piece we discover gets us closer to our very old truth. The closest discovery we have to this device are medieval cathedral clocks, but those were built about a millennium later, so where did this come from? Aliens? Autobots? You be the judge. Number 2, the Black Knight satellite. First discovered in 1954 by Dr. Lincoln La Paz. The Black Knight satellite is the oldest recorded satellite in history. When news broke that La Paz had discovered the satellite, it was a pretty eye-opening headline, considering that there were no countries that have actually launched a satellite at that time yet. And it was photographs of the Black Knight that were released in 1998 that caught our attention. This photo. Now, before jumping to the conclusion that this is an alien space knight, the Pentagon initially thought that the Russians had just beaten them into space. Now, space journalist James Oberg says it's just a lost piece of heating equipment from when they were building the International Space Station. Oh yeah, you sure about that, James, huh? What, do you work for NASA or something? He does? Huh. While that theory does make a lot of sense, there are still other factors that play into this conspiracy. Nikola Tesla previously discovered some strange signals that many believe was actually the same Black Knight satellite. While at his laboratory in Colorado Springs in 1899, he picked up radio signals that he believed came from, well, another planet. Who knows, maybe the Black Knight will just collide with Elon Musk's space car and then he'll just fire up the engine and head down to Earth. I feel like that's the only thing left for 2020 at this point. And lastly, number 1. Gobek Tey. When you think of old man-made landmarks, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? The pyramids maybe? Stonehenge perhaps? Discovered in 1994 in Sanliurfa, Turkey, Safak Yildiz came across a stone that had an unusual shape to it that was sticking out of the ground and decided to get a closer look. Who knows, maybe it's another one of those time-traveling hammers. Once realizing it was attached to a much larger rock, German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt came in and dug up the grounds. What he found was much cooler than an oddly shaped rock. See, this rock was actually a T-shaped pillar and was one of a dozen found. And each pillar was around 20 tons, covered with carvings of animals like birds and insects. And the best part? The rock dates to be about 60,000 years older than Stonehenge. Excuse me? Around each of the massive pillars were large circles of stones. And each of these stone monuments would have taken years to be moved, first of all, and the carvings on top of that? This is just wild. So what is this? Why is this here? Well, Klaus Schmidt believed that it was for ancient funerals, and had hoped that during the exploration he would find bodies under rock circles or under the pillars. That's a wild thing to hope for. I've never been here at work and been like, I really hope I find some bodies hidden under some rocks. Fingers crossed. They didn't find anything though, and we have yet to find any signs of previous life on the site to this day, or plant life for that matter. Some researchers have even gone so far to say that it's the biblical Garden of Eden. So what do you think Gobek Tey is hiding? Let us know in the comments down below.
Number 5 on this list is alien wheels. We've all heard the stories before about strange symbols and signs appearing in cornfields. Things that can only be seen from a bird's eye view and don't make any sense for a human to have done. Well, this next discovery definitely falls under that same category. The image here has some very interesting wheels that are etched into the earth. These wheels vary in size and shape, but also have a lot of similarities too, and look to have been created by the same entity. They're located in the Azraq Oasis of Jordan. Now, relatively speaking, this is pretty much in the middle of nowhere. Not a lot of people reside in this area of the world, and it really begs the question how on earth these wheels got here, and also, why are they here in the first place? Well, these alien wheels aren't new by any means. In fact, they've been etched into our planet for roughly 8,500 years. That is a long freaking time ago and makes it so that there's no record of any human doing this. Scientists have been studying these Earth drawings for quite some time and can't seem to come up with a reason why humans would have put them here. Some of them have theorized that it has to do with the sun and potentially the winter and summer solstice. However, that's never been confirmed and it's just a theory that's been thrown around. Many extraterrestrial believers think that this is some solid proof of an alien presence though. Thousands of years ago, aliens came down and drew these circles into the earth to leave their mark behind. Maybe they drew them there so they would know where they've been if they ever came back, or maybe it's for some other alien reason that we just simply aren't privy to. I don't think that we can look at this and immediately say that it was aliens who did it, but it's also hard to immediately say that it was humans either. They certainly look pretty eerie when looking at them from above, and I feel like they can't just be some ancient civilization's attempt at art. They have to serve some sort of purpose. Comment down below what you think these wheels were for and who put them there to begin with. Number 4 on this list is a secret church. The Church of Scientology has often been critiqued due to various controversies since their inception and their overall system of beliefs in general. According to their website, Scientology is a religion that offers a precise path leading to a complete and certain understanding of one's true spiritual nature and one's relationship to self, family, groups, mankind, all life forms, the material universe, the spiritual universe, and the Supreme Being. Now, according to Wikipedia, this Supreme Being is Xenu, also called Zemu, who was the dictator of the Galactic Confederacy who brought billions of people to Earth in DC-8 like spacecraft 75 million years ago, stacked them around volcanoes, and then killed them with hydrogen bombs. This is all part of the Scientology religion and what the devout followers believe in. Therefore, this religion has some deep ties to space and the universe since the Supreme Being came from space. Well, this image of 2 massive diamonds inside of 2 even bigger circles in New Mexico certainly sticks out as an area of importance to that community. In fact, author John Sweeney has claimed that this spot is the home to a secret church underground belonging to the Church of Scientology. Whether this is true or not has yet to be confirmed, but church aside, what are these symbols in the earth doing there? It's already pretty mysterious if the church was to have a secret bunker there, but if they don't, then it honestly gets even more mysterious. If the Church of Scientology didn't put these markings here, then who did? These are very accurate circles and diamonds and looks to have been done by somebody who knew what they were doing. So either we're looking at a secret church bunker or potential extraterrestrial interference with the planet. Either way, both things are pretty crazy, and I can certainly see how the first person to discover this image would have been a little freaked out. Let me know in the comments down below again, what do you think caused these massive symbols, cause I honestly have no idea. Number 3 on this list is a giant bunny. Yep, you heard that right guys, a giant bunny can be spotted on Google Earth if you head to the Piedmont region of Italy. This thing isn't as scary as it is just freaking weird. It isn't a live bunny or anything like that, just a massive pink rabbit. The kind of rabbit that you may buy for your kid as a plush toy, just maybe not this big because it wouldn't fit in your home. In fact, if we look at the image, we can see that this bunny is literally bigger than an entire home that it is next to. And it isn't just a little bit bigger either, this rabbit absolutely dwarfs that house. So why on earth is there a massive rabbit just chilling in the middle of Piedmont, Italy? How did it get there and why are we not doing something about it? Well, luckily for mankind, this isn't some corpse of a massive bunny race that's coming for human flesh. In fact, it's a piece of a really large art collection. The rabbit is 60 meters in length and about 5 meters off the ground and was put there by an art group named Gelatin in 2005. I'm not really sure why this group decided to put a massive bunny rabbit atop a 1,600 meter tall hill in Italy, but I also fade grade 7 art, so my artistic opinion isn't really the best. Either way, if I was discovering this thing for the first time on Google Earth and had no idea what this art project was, then I'd definitely be a little bit freaked out. Sadly, the bunny rabbit is mostly decomposed of now, and there isn't too much left of it considering it's been there for over 10 years. But this also begs the question, how many other plush animals are just waiting to be discovered on Google Earth? Number 2 on this list is a secret military base. So I live in Toronto, Canada, and living in Toronto, Canada, you hear a lot about the secret military bases in North America. Area 51 is by far the most famous, and growing up, everyone was familiar with the legends that surrounded it. I personally still remember talking with my friends at recess and guessing what crazy alien tech could be kept secret there. I imagine that this isn't the only secret base in the world though, but potentially the one that, based on where I grew up, I'm most familiar with. Well, for those who grew up in Asia, they might be more familiar with the secret military base that's located in the Gobi Desert. The Gobi Desert spans across large parts of Mongolia and some of northern China. The base in question is in the northern China area of said desert, very hidden from the public's eye. People are speculating that it's so hidden and out in the middle of nowhere because some very secretive experiments are getting done there. Not a lot of people live out in the Gobi Desert, making it a pretty much perfect spot to work on some very advanced and secret technologies. The craziest thing about this base is the elaborate maze-like thing that stretches for over 30 kilometers in length. This is thought to be used as some weather tracking device, although it's far too advanced for me to even begin to comprehend, and it's just super high tech. Many theorists have thought this place is a secret space base and could be holding some extraterrestrial technology that we don't know about. If Area 51 is any indication, then we may never figure out what's truly going down behind the walls of this massive base in the desert. Number 1 on this list is a ghost girl. This one is definitely creepy and has the most potential out of all these images to haunt you. Not quite found on Google Earth, found on Google Maps Street View, one can see the distinct image of a ghostly looking child peering out from behind a tree. This image was captured back in 2018 and is of the Martha Chapel Cemetery in Texas. Considering it's a cemetery and we're already among the dead, having the ghost of a dead girl potentially haunting that area isn't totally unbelievable. It should also be noted that in the corner on the left there's a dark figure in the cemetery. Some people have speculated that this could be a demon in its own right and that this cemetery is just riddled with ghouls of all kinds. Also, when you zoom in on the little girl behind the tree, you see that she doesn't really have a lot of color to her. She looks to be almost totally gray. If she wasn't completely gray, then it could be possible that a girl was just playing hide and seek when this image was captured, but the color certainly convinces me that something might be up here. If you ever find yourself in Texas, then maybe make this cemetery a spot to avoid going if you can.
Kicking off today's list, we have the sunken city of Dwara. Until roughly 50 years ago, it was simply a legend, a story passed throughout the ages. The most famous legend about the lost city of Dwara can be found in the ancient epic of Mahabharata. Dwara, similar to Atlantis, is said to have sunk beneath the sea at some point in the distant past. According to the sacred scripture of Srimad Bhagavatam, the city of Dwara was built in response to Jarasandha, the ruler of Magadha, who was constantly attacking Mathura. To prevent further attacks on his clan, Lord Krishna decided to establish a separate city on India's western coast. The city quickly rose to prominence and began the unstoppable pivot of Lord Krishna's mission, housing thousands of people in approximately 900 palaces that were crafted out of silver, gold, and precious stones, along with being heavily fortified and could only be reached by ship. At the time, the city of Dwara quickly became a talking point around the world, inspiring awe and wonder. According to the Mahabharata's 23rd and 34th stanzas, the city was inundated and submerged by the Arabian Sea on the day that Krishna departed the earth to join the spiritual world after 125 years, and this is when the Kali Age began. The ocean's deity reclaimed the land, sinking the lost city of Dwara, but sparing Lord Krishna's palace. It is also said that the lost city of Dwara was attacked by Vimana, a flying machine. The description of the fight encourages ancient alien theories, as it appears that it was fought with sophisticated technology and powerful weapons from orbit. The spacecraft launched an attack on the city using energy weaponry, which resembled a lightning strike to onlookers, and it was so devastating that much of the city lay in ruins following the attack. A marine scientist discovered remnants of an underwater civilization near the coast of Dwara, the city that's still on land that is, in the 1970s, and in 2002, scientists discovered an extremely advanced civilization from the past lying untouched beneath the ocean's surface. With the help of sound matrix and image technology, along with sub-bottom profiling, marine scientists were able to find the exact location of the city, including some stone structures. The lost city of Dwara was officially found 120 feet underwater in the Gulf of Cambat off the western coast of India. Thanks to carbon testing, it was established that the city is anywhere between 7,000 to 9,500 years old and stretches out 7 to 8 kilometers long and 3 to 4 kilometers in width. The most fascinating, or creepy thing about this underwater city, depending on your point of view, is that all human remains are still intact. Ergo, the main reason it made its way to today's list. Look, I'm not a scuba diver, but I can't think I'd be too fond of swimming around casually, admiring, architecture, and bam! Perfectly preserved dead bodies. During the 2002 excavation of Dwara, many mud vessels, temple bells, ancient ritualistic vessels, and other artifacts were found, with the carbon dating indicating that they date back to roughly 7,200 BC, otherwise known as the prehistoric period. At the time of this research, scientists also found that a massive man-made wall that's almost 2,000 feet tall that has since been unearthed during periods of low tide and can't be easily seen. Granted, they're still waiting on absolute results from some strange structures made of iron they weren't able to identify. Maybe they're from the aliens? In fourth place, we have the Antarctica sea spiders. Okay, I'll admit it now, this one might be on the list purely because of how much it made me jump while researching. Seriously, look at the photos of these things. Yeah, this reaction is genuine. If I get nightmares tonight, I'm blaming y'all, okay? Before I start talking specifically about the big guys, time to dive into exactly what sea spiders are. Sea spiders are marine arthropods of the Pantopoda order and belong to the Pycnogonida class. They're cosmopolitan, and well, to some of us that sounds like a fancy drink. It just means they're found in oceans around the world. Lucky for me. There's over 1,300 known species, and they have legs ranging from 1 millimeter to over 70 centimeters in length, and that's over 2 feet in length. While most of them are towards the smaller end of this range, that one qualify as terrifying now. Would it? Although sea spiders are not true spiders, or even arachnids, their traditional classification as chelicerates would place them closer to true spiders than to other well-known arthropod groups, such as insects or crustaceans if correct. Sea spiders tend to either walk along the bottom of the ocean with their stilt-like legs, or just swim above it using an umbrella pulsing motion. They're mostly carnivorous predators or scavengers that feed on sponges, polychaetes, and bryozoans. Alright, time to talk specifically about the big guys. Those really long legs I mentioned a moment ago are everything to the Antarctic sea spider, since they're where its vital organs are kept, because it doesn't have much of a body. Its proboscis is also important because that's what it uses to suck the insides out of worms, jellyfish, sponges, and other soft body prey. Sounds delicious, I guess? Right now, all I can picture is like that one scene from The Lion King where Timon and Pumbaa are sucking the insides out of squishy bugs, and I'm pretty sure Simba and I are having the exact same facial reaction. For my brain's sake, it's highly unlikely for most of us to ever come across one of the giant spiders, since they only live in the oceans around the polar regions. Gigantism has been observed in a number of other Arctic and Antarctic species, leading biologists to consult a couple of theories that certain elements of the polar environment must be conducive to humongous body size. Over several hypotheses have been put forward, with some scientists claiming that large body size may have developed as an evolutionary trait to enable animals to withstand long periods of starvation during the winter, when resources tend to become, scarce in the polar regions. While others have suggested that some of these species may be somehow descended from creatures that invaded the Arctic and Antarctic from the deep sea, where high rates of gigantism have also been recorded. However, a recent study lends support to an entirely different theory, which revolves around the availability of oxygen in the polar oceans, since oxygen is more soluble in cold water than warm water. It has been suggested that this high availability of oxygen, coupled with the fact that low temperatures slow animals' metabolism down and reduce their need for oxygen, could facilitate their gigantism. And hey, they're not venomous, so overall, they're not as dangerous. But that's not gonna stop my fears. In third place, we have the Mariana Trench. I'm just gonna apologize in advance because I know I'll slip up at some point, if not every time, and say Marianas Trench out of habit. I can't help it. They're my favorite band. Even writing up my points today, I kept adding in the extra S. Feel free to let me know in the comments if you're also a fan. The Mariana Trench is an oceanic trench located in the western Pacific Ocean, about 200 kilometers east of the Mariana Islands, and it is the deepest oceanic trench on Earth. It's crescent-shaped and measures about 2,550 kilometers in length and 69 kilometers in width. The maximum known depth is roughly over 36,000 feet, plus or minus another 80 feet, which is way too much math for my brain. At the southern end of a small slot-shaped valley and its floor known as the Challenger Deep. For reference, if Mount Everest was located at this point in the trench, its peak would still be underwater by more than 2 kilometers. And just remember, that's the world's tallest mountain we're talking about here, not some cute little hike. The Mariana Trench has been a major area of intrigue throughout history, with the trench first being explored during the Challenger expedition in 1875 using a weighted rope, which recorded a depth of 26,850 feet. In 1877, a map was published titled the Tiefenkarte des Grosses Ozeans, or Depth Map of the Great Ocean, for those of us who don't feel like butchering a pronunciation today. Most recently, in 2011, it was announced at the American Geophysical Union Fall Meeting that a U.S. Navy hydrographic ship equipped with a multi-beam echo sounder had conducted a survey which mapped the entire trench to 330 feet resolution. As of 2022, 22 crewed descents and 7 uncrewed descents have been achieved. Some notable discoveries over the years include the 1960 expedition, which claimed to have observed large creatures living at the bottom, such as flatfish that were about 30 centimeters long, and shrimp. In July of 2011, a research expedition deployed untethered landers, or drop cams for those of us that prefer simple English, equipped with digital video cameras and lights to explore this deep sea region. Gigantic single-celled organisms with a size of more than 10 centimeters in diameter, belonging to the class of Monothelomia, were observed. Monothelomia are noteworthy for their size, their extreme abundance on the seafloor, and their role as hosts for a variety of organisms. In December of 2014, a new species of snailfish was discovered at a depth of approximately 26,722 feet, breaking the previous record for the deepest living fish seen on video. During that 2014 expedition, several new species were filmed, including amphipods known as supergiants, bringing us back to that deep water gigantism I talked about earlier. Now, before any of y'all go, but Alexa, why is this scary? Well, it's because it's a constant unknown. Being so large and so deep, something new and creepy is discovered every time people explore its depths. Who knows what's still hiding down there? In second place, we have the blue-ringed octopus. Now, just a little background. An octopus is a soft-bodied, 8-limbed mollusk of the Octopoda order that consists of around 300 different species. Like other cephalopods, an octopus is bilaterally symmetric, with 2 eyes and a beaked mouth at the center point of the 8 limbs. The soft body can radically alter its shape, enabling octopuses to squeeze through small gaps. The siphon is used both for respiration and for locomotion by expelling a jet of water. Octopuses have a complex nervous system and excellent sight, and are among the most intelligent and behaviorally diverse of all invertebrates. Octopuses inhabit various regions of the ocean, including coral reefs, pelagic waters, and the seabed. Some live in the intertidal zone and others at abyssal depths. All octopuses are venomous, but only the blue-ringed octopuses are known to be deadly to humans, ergo why they're my focus today. This specific species can be found in tide pools and coral reefs in the Pacific and Indian Oceans, from Japan to Australia, and can be identified by their yellowish skin and characteristic blue and black rings that change color dramatically when threatened. They eat small crustaceans, including crabs, hermit crabs, shrimp, and other small sea animals. Despite their small size that ranges from 5 to 8 inches in circumference, they are very dangerous to humans if provoked when handled, because their venom contains a powerful neurotoxin tetrodotoxin, which can cause loss of all sensations and paralysis of voluntary muscles, including the diaphragm and intercostal muscles, ergo stopping breathing. The full list of possible side effects from the venom include nausea, heart failure, severe and total paralysis, blindness, and can lead to death within minutes. The blue-ringed octopus carries enough venom to kill 26 adult humans within minutes. I'm just going to repeat that to be clear, 26 adult humans within minutes. Their bites are tiny and often painless, with many victims not realizing they have been envenomated until respiratory depression and paralysis begins. Oh, and by the way, there is no such thing as blue-ringed octopus antivenom available. And finally, in first place we have the stonefish. Now, you might be asking, after the deadly octopus and a literal pit in the ocean, how can we get scarier? Welcome to where I almost jumped out of my chair and onto the floor. Stonefish are a family of fish called Cynocidae. They are famous for being the most venomous fish in the world, with a sting that causes excruciating pain in, you guessed it, humans. Their venom is lethal to other marine animals and humans, causing intense pain, breathing problems, damage to the heart, fits, and paralysis. Now, thankfully, unlike the blue-ringed octopus, there is an antivenom, but if it's not delivered quickly, the effects can be fatal. We know of 5 different species that exist. The midget stonefish, or the Cynocea alula, estuarine stonefish, or Cynocea orida, the Red Sea stonefish, or Cynocea nana, the Cynocea platarincha, and simply the stonefish, or Cynocea verrucos. Look, I tried my best. They hail from the coastal regions of the Indo-Pacific Ocean, so northern Australia, India, the Philippines, and others. Their name comes from their ability to blend in with rocky seafloors and amongst coral, which is what makes them easily stepped on by people and is a good chunk of the danger. They have 13 spines along their backs, which is what delivers the toxin, and at the base of each spine is a venom sac, which is activated under pressure. So, you know, when somebody accidentally steps on them. Now, if that's not terrifying enough for you, because we do have a reputation to uphold here, scientists at the University of Kansas have discovered that stonefish also have a hidden switchblade in their face that they can flick out whenever they feel like they're in danger. They call this bony, blade-like protrusion a lacrimal saber, and it's located on a bone under the fish's eyes. The saber is housed inside the fish's head, and they use their cheek muscles to deploy it. One good thing at least is that it's not venomous like their spines.
Number 5 on this list is a German hideout. In the thick vegetation of Teyuquar Park in Argentina, researchers back in 2015 discovered what is believed to be the ruins of a secret German hideout. This hideout is believed to have been built back in World War II by the Nazis. The lead archaeologist on this team, Daniel Schlevelsen, says apparently halfway through the Second World War, the had a secret project to build shelters for top leaders in the event of defeat. Inaccessible sites in the middle of deserts, in the mountains, on a cliff, or in the middle of the jungle like this. Over the years, more sites like this have been found in places like South America. The reason that they know these ruins were built by the Germans in World War II, and the purpose of this site would have been to act as a secret safe house upon defeat, was because they found 5 separate German coins that were dated from 1938 to 1941, and also a piece of porcelain that indicated it was made in Germany. The fact that we only came across those ruins a few years ago is pretty scary. How many other German hideouts are there scattered around the world that we don't know about? Maybe the bigger question, as opposed to how many potential locations there are, is how many were actually used for their purpose. This particular one would have not been needed because the Argentinian leader at the end of World War II was sympathetic to the Germans and other leaders fighting on that side. But still, finding something like this has to make you wonder, where else are we going to find secret hideouts? Number 4 on this list is the Franklin Expedition Mummies. 2 ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, led by British captain Sir John Franklin, were sent to explore the uncharted areas of the Northwest Passage in the Canadian Arctic back in 1845. This expedition, as you probably could have guessed, didn't go as well as the captain would have hoped. Up there in the Canadian Arctic, things get cold, and that's exactly what happened when the crew was in an area of Nunavut. They became icebound and their boats got stuck. The crew waited for a year, losing several members to the cold while they were there, hoping that the ice would soon melt and they could sail again. After a year of waiting, the survivors decided to abandon the ship and set off for the mainland of Canada. Sadly, they disappeared on their way back and were never heard from again. Over the 150 years since this failed expedition took place, several things have been discovered in the vast cold wilderness. One of the most notable are the mummies of the crew. These bodies were preserved so perfectly by the frigid temperatures up there that they may as well have been mummified. Stumbling upon these bodies, even though it would have been a great scientific find, would have been bloody terrifying if you ask me. I also can't believe that we ever thought this was a good idea back in 845 to begin with. Like, I'm all for exploring and discovering new things, but trudging a sailboat through the Arctic doesn't seem like the best idea. I can't even begin to comprehend how cold that entire trip would have been for the crew. Now, these wreckage sites are a National Heritage Site and are visited often by divers and researchers alike. Number 3 on this list is the Lava Lake. Mount Erebus, which is an absolutely killer name by the way, is a volcano that's located in Antarctica. It's the 6th highest ultra mountain on the continent and it's located on Ross Island. It's very close to 3 other inactive volcanoes called Mount Terror, Mount Bird, and Mount Terra Nova. Mount Terror may have been a better name for the volcano that we're referencing though, because it's very much still active and doing well. In fact, this volcano is actually one of the most active on the entire planet. What makes this place a tad bit scarier than most though is the lake that sits atop of it. Located in one of the coldest areas on the planet at a super high elevation, the phenomenon that you get when you have lava there is really interesting. It's created this strange lava lake that's literally a mixture of raging hot fire and also blistering cold ice. When you look at this lake, it truly looks like something that you'd see straight out of hell. Also, this thing is pretty terrifying because it's actually a leading cause to the depletion of the ozone layer. The science behind this is a tad bit confusing, but what isn't confusing is the fact that we actually can't do anything about it at all. This lava lake is just going to continue depleting the ozone and erupting whenever it feels like. This volcano has also been the spot of a horrible tragedy because back in 1979, a flight carrying over 250 people from New Zealand crashed directly into the side of the mountain, killing hundreds in the process. Number 2 on this list is Hiru Onada. If you haven't heard this story before, then strap in because this one is a doozy. Hiro Onada isn't a place or an object. Hiro Onada is a person. Hiro Onada was a fighter in the Imperial Japanese Army during World War II. For most of Japan and the members of the Japanese Army, the war ended in 1945 after America dropped the 2 atomic bombs on them. This wasn't the case for Hiro Onada though. The New York Times writes, "Caught in a time warp, Mr. Onada, a second lieutenant, was one of the war's last holdouts. A soldier who believed that the emperor was a deity and the war a sacred mission, who survived on bananas and coconuts and sometimes killed villagers he assumed were enemies, who finally went home to the lotus land of paper and wood, which turned out to be a futuristic world of skyscrapers, television, jet planes, and pollution and atomic destruction." That's right guys, Hiro Onada spent a solid 29 years on an island in the Philippines living in the jungle until 1974, still fighting World War II by himself. He refused to believe that Japan had lost and believed wholeheartedly that they were still at war and he wasn't going to go down without a fight. This meant, as the New York Times suggested, finding this guy in the jungle was super dangerous. If you stumbled upon him, then it's very likely that you might die, considering he would have interpreted you as an enemy soldier. I can't even imagine how horrible it must have been to live in the jungle by yourself for 29 years, still believing that you're at war. Number 1 on this list is the Lost City of Giants. Ancient legends in Ecuador believe that there was a time where massive humans or giants roamed and ran the earth. Sounds a little bit ridiculous off the top and something straight out of a fairy tale, but that might not be the case based on the ruins that they discovered recently. An article written by Ivan Petrovich says, in order to find the lost city of giants, a group of explorers teamed up with the locals who were well aware and knew that this ancient city was in fact real. The Aboriginals led the group of explorers to the site they consider is truly holy, and local tribes gathered at the city of giants to celebrate powerful spirits which, according to legend, still inhabited the megalithic site. According to reports, when the group of researchers arrived at the lost city of giants, they discovered a set of megalithic structures. The largest of them was a 260 foot tall by 260 foot wide pyramid with an irregular angle. This is truly pretty nuts. It gets even crazier though, because along with the oversized structures, they also found tools that were far too big for humans to use. The researchers who were at this site and saw it firsthand have bought in and have come out and said that they think there's serious reason to believe that in a distant past, a race of giants roamed the earth. I started off this entry by saying that the belief in giants is something from a fairy tale, but after looking at all of this, it may not even be the case. Maybe they were actually real. Hopefully in the near future, more researchers can start buying into this theory and there will be some other important discoveries that can help validate what the Ecuadorians have been believing for centuries.
In at 5, hundreds of bats. This is one of my worst nightmares, moving into a new home and discovering it is completely infested with bats. And that is exactly what happened to Calvin Oshoey, who purchased a home in Whitehorse and after only 2 months discovered he was not the only one living there. The bats were found to be in the attic, walls and even the ceiling. Calvin worked tirelessly to seal the house so no other bats could gain entry, but what's worse is that every winter bats migrate south. However, they also return to the same spot every single year. Eventually Calvin had no choice but to build a sanctuary outside of his home in hopes that the bats would decide to reside there instead. Coming in at number 4, Green Corpse. This discovery comes from a couple who had just moved into a New York apartment and noticed a terrible smell coming from one of the cupboards. So, of course, they decided to investigate. And what they discovered was truly disturbing. Wrapped in a shower curtain, they found a dead body, as well as a note from the victim's killer. The note also apologized for the smell, so that's nice. The body was that of Sydney Harris, a 64-year-old ex-con who was the previous tenant. To make matters worse, the building manager had only decided to rent out the property after Sydney had disappeared for a while, offering up the apartment to the couple on the condition that they clear it out before they move in. In at number 3, Trapdoor. Well, this would just be bloody terrifying. Imagine moving into a new home and discovering a trapdoor in the basement, leading down into the earth below. Yep, that's exactly what happened to a Redditor who claimed the trapdoor led into an 8 foot by 4 foot wide cement well that was filled with water, yet there were no pipes, making the trapdoor oddly suspicious. The Redditor later filled in the well with stones and eventually sold the house. The trapdoor, however, has never been explained.